Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 6:15. A Long Journey. 2. The mirror dimension was a treacherous place. The living conditions were almost impossible, with monsters lurking everywhere, and the distant ball of white that scorched everything beneath. And yet, despite the brutal living conditions, civilizations and empires still managed to exist, and even thrive, in this unforgiving world. But naturally, the same brutality that allowed them to rise swiftly also ensured their downfall came just as fast. Virithanash was different, however. Located at the edge of the Crimson Sea, one of the 7 major seas of the mirror dimension, the city was one of the central hubs that connected to the remnant south, where the eclipsed maw was located. Built even before the era of the Shattered World, the city was as old as they came. A dry, metallic scent lingered over the small city that sat between jagged cliffs and the endless red waters. It was a smell of rust and salt, mixed with the blood of all the beasts and humans that had died in the sea. But of course, that wasn't the primary reason for its red color. That mainly stemmed from the type of algae that rested beneath the water. Ships crafted from dark wood and gleaming mirror glass docked at the harbor, the crimson water lapping against their sides. Nearby, a large bazaar sprawled out, its colorful stalls nestled against faded white marble buildings that seemed to blend seamlessly with the harsh light of the white sun overhead. Buy one, get one free. Purchase from our stall for the freshest and highest quality items. Fresh Orkney meat. Come and get your meat. Come get your rune paper here. We provide fresh rune paper. Freshly sewn clothes over here. The bazaar was lively, with voices screaming continuously as the merchants tried to sell their goods. There was no better place than Virithanash to sell goods. All looked good on the outside. However, all was not well. A closer look revealed the desperation etched on the faces of some merchants as they peddled their wares. Their pale faces and sweat-slicked brows betrayed the tension beneath their forced smiles. 50% off. Buy it now. Buy one, get one free. Purchase one good. You get one for free. 60% off. Their voices grew louder with the passing of time, their faces paling, and the tension on their faces tightening. Come, get your goods. I'm just 100 salas short. So long as anyone can provide me with that much money, you can have anything you wish from the stall. Someone, despite the cries of some of the merchants, nobody paid close attention to them. Their pleas were a common occurrence within Virithanash. And then, dong, dong. The deep, resounding toll of a bell echoed through the air, reverberating as the massive black church at the heart of the city trembled with each chime. The merchants despaired, and the windows of several houses closed. Then came the emissaries, cloaked in black, their beaked masks like vultures descending upon the dying. They radiated an aura of dread and fear as they walked through the bazaar. At their helm was a man in a gray robe, his mask matching the others, but his presence was different. An overwhelming aura of pressure radiated from him, making the air around him feel thick. Their steps seemed to drain the very air from the surroundings, and a suffocating silence descended upon the bazaar. The men in black moved from stall to stall, and with each stop, the merchants anxiously handed over sacks that seemed to be filled with gold. The silence carried through with each transaction as the men in black continued to collect payment from each merchant. Everything seemed to be proceeding smoothly, until, "That's not enough." A hoarse voice suddenly echoed, and all eyes fell on the trembling merchant. "No, how could it be? You're missing a total of 75 salas. Let me check. I might have." Trembling, the merchant tried to look around his stall for any change while looking around, a clear look of despair appearing on his face. And then, "Do you have the money?" Okay." Nodding, the men dressed in black moved around the stall, leaving the merchant no room for retreat as his face turned completely pale. "No, wait. Give me some time. I will have the money. Just give me some time. I've always paid on time. Please." The merchant's screams pierced the silence of the bazaar as the men in black closed in on him, grabbing him from all sides. Without hesitation, they followed the lead of the figures in gray robes, lifting him and carrying him away. "No, I can pay. I can pay." His screams continued to pierce through the surroundings, but they were only met with pitiful glances as he was brought away. Such a scene was common in Virithanash. Anyone who failed to pay the emissaries of the goddess of light, Panthea, was met with such a fate. It was only through her protection that the city was able to remain standing. As such, donations were necessary. Those who couldn't contribute to the city had no reason to remain within the city. Help! I can pay. Wait. I'm only a few salas shy. Can't you forgive me this once? Please. No. As the merchants were hauled away, new faces quickly filled their stalls, as if they had been waiting in the wings, prepared in advance. Such was the brutal life of those who lived at the edge of the Crimson Sea. Soon, the emissaries arrived at a particular stall. It was a modest setup, adorned with a white cloth, and several dozen books lay neatly arranged atop it. Amid the chaos, one man sat calmly in a white-clothed stall, a book in hand and a leg casually crossed. With sharp brows, silver-framed glasses, and a composed air, he looked less like a merchant and more like a misplaced nobleman. And as if finally sensing the emissaries, he raised his head, a warm smile tugging at his lips. "Ah, good afternoon," he said warmly. "Interested in a book, perhaps?" The surroundings turned deathly quiet, whispers suddenly filling the bazaar. Is he crazy? Did he seriously just say that? Is he looking to die? Nobody could believe their ears. Was someone so bold as to say something like this? But very quickly, people realized the situation. It looks like he's one of the new merchants who recently took place. He probably wasn't able to reach the quota, and is trying to swindle his way out of the situation. Some smirked upon hearing the voice. He might as well just give up. Swindling the emissaries? PFTT. A wave of pitying glances swept through the crowd, all directed at the book merchant. In the long history of Virathanash, only a rare few had ever managed to elude the grasp of the emissaries, and those few were all legendary figures that now stood at the top of the mirror dimension. How could such a man compete with such figures? You do not have the money? Breaking the silence was the hoarse voice of the leading emissary, his gray robe fluttering silently as his eyes beneath the mask sharpened. A terrifying pressure suddenly bore down on the surroundings, several red runes manifesting over the mask of the gray-robed emissary. You were told the rules, he continued. To come up short is to defy the goddess of light. Her light does not shine on the unworthy. The men in black started to surround the merchant, who remained calm throughout the entire exchange. The tensions escalated from that point. And just as things were starting to turn dangerous, the merchant placed his book down and put on his glasses. That was when his face changed. What's this? He had a shocked expression on his face as he looked around. Emissaries? Oh my! He quickly stood and reached beneath the stall, drawing out a heavy sack of coins. My sincerest apologies, he said, bowing slightly as he offered the bag to the gray-robed emissary. I'm terribly nearsighted without these, and I was so immersed in my reading that I didn't see you arrive. The crowd stared in stunned silence. He then pointed toward his glasses. And I can't really see without my glasses, you see. I really do apologize. Silence filled the space as they heard the merchant's words. Seriously, no one knew how to react, especially since his words looked extremely convincing. He also provided the money necessary. Plus, who in their right mind would do this just to provoke the emissaries? A mistake. The emissary did not move. He stared at the sack, then at the merchant, silent as death. Then, looking towards the merchant, the runes on his mask started to fade. Pay an additional 15%, the emissary said coldly, and the offense will be forgiven. The eyes of a few widened upon hearing the emissary's words. 15%? That was a ridiculous amount. It was already hard for many to get the normal quota, and yet... Oh, okay. What? Everyone's eyes widened when they saw the merchant pull out another sack and hand it to the emissary. I really do apologize for what I did. I do hope that this makes you forgive my actions. Throughout the entire time, the merchant maintained an elegant and refined demeanor, handling everything carefully and neatly. The emissary stared at the money, seemingly lost in thought. But then, brushing hands against the merchant, he grabbed the money and turned around. Your crimes have been forgiven. There will not be a next time. Ah, yes, of course. The merchant lowered his head and apologized yet again. The emissary paused again. You. His voice softly echoed. Your name. The merchant looked up, his eyes shining faintly behind the lenses. Lazarus, he replied softly. A traveling merchant from afar. And then, with a polite inclination of his head, his lips pulled further up. Rest assured, such an incident will never happen again. Of that I promise. Chapter 6:16. The Grey Chamber Merchant Group 1. A tall black spire stood at the heart of Virathanash. It stood out amongst the rest of the buildings, standing tallest and overlooking the city that touched the Crimson Sea. It was the temple of the goddess of light. Every evening, the emissaries of the church left to collect payments from the merchants around. Each region of the city had a required quota to meet in order to keep things running. In such a dangerous and unforgiving place, safety was hard to maintain, especially since the threats that tried to break into the city didn't come from just the monsters. Within the large hall of the temple, several groups had already gathered. They were the emissaries, all coming back from the daily collection period. From among the groups, the team leaders stepped forward, each one marked by their gray clothes. They all handed over the collective payment they received from the merchants outside. 31,305 salas? That just narrowly puts you in first place. One of the collectors raised a brow, their brown robes fluttering slightly, surprise flickering across their pale features. Their gaze shifted to the team leader, and a faint smile curved their lips. Not bad, keep it up. Thank you. Anez humbly accepted the praise before quietly retreating. This had indeed been one of the better collection days of his career as team leader, and it was all partly thanks to that strange merchant from before. With the additional 15% he had managed to receive from him, he was just barely able to rank at the top. This was a great achievement within the temple. Only team leaders who managed to rank at the top once had the chance to be ranked up to the rank of collectors. By then, he wouldn't have to do this type of dirty work. Anez had a dream. He aspired to rise as a luminarch, one of the highest positions within the temple, and claim a place upon the seat of Celeste. His goal was to spread the doctrine of the goddess across all lands bathed in her light. To him, the goddess was everything. She was the one to pick her up and give her a purpose within this colorless world. He wanted to be her everything. The payment collection period is over. For the teams with the lowest performance, you will be marked down for the time being. Should you fail to meet the quota again, the team leader will be dismissed and replaced. As the head collector's voice rained down, the expression of a few changed beneath the masks as tension rose in the air. Anez smirked at the sight, slowly turning away and heading away from the temple. As he did, he stripped off his clothes and mask, revealing the face of a pale young man with short brown hair and hollowed cheeks. Every emissary had their identity hidden. Nobody knew what each looked like, and things were kept like this for those in the lower ranks. This was intentionally done to prevent any spies from the other churches from infiltrating the temple through the members. There were severe repercussions for those who had their identities exposed. Anez blended seamlessly with the people of the city, his steps slow and steady as he headed towards the port. Such was the life of the emissaries. They were no different than regular citizens outside of work, and as he walked out in his regular appearance, Anez stopped by the port. Splash! The crimson sea roared as its furious tides slammed into the docks, sending waves of blood-red water spilling over the edge. Anez stood by the edge, just far enough for the water not to reach his shoes as he stared into the distance. Gradually, his brows furrowed and his tongue clicked. They're here. A large shadow appeared over the horizon. Soon, the shadow grew more distinct, clearing up to be a massive ship. The moment the ship appeared, the atmosphere around the port changed. Everyone grew tense, and staring at the distant ship, Anez remained expressionless, his clothes fluttering silently. Soon, the ship docked at the port, its massive frame casting a large shadow on everything beneath as figures appeared aboard, their smirks all too clear. Hiya! What? Several leapt down from the ship's deck, their drunken laughter and boisterous voices echoing through the air. We finally touched land. It's been a while, ha ha ha. Their appearances were wild, and their eyes were sharp. With one glance, one could tell they were powerful, but even they paled in comparison to the man who descended the ramp with slow and steady steps. His towering frame and broad build radiated an overwhelming presence. With a belly that jutted out and shoulder-length curls clinging to his face, he drew every gaze in the port, the tensions rising. Most glaring was the tattoo on his neck, a red, tattered veil draped over a skull. There was not a single look of goodwill directed his way. Anez also felt tense, trying his best to avoid their attention. He was just about to back away when he suddenly bumped into someone. What, He turned his head to see a familiar figure standing behind him, his calm expression once again standing out to him. Anez quietly held his tongue. He couldn't reveal his identity. Hello. The merchant smiled, his gaze warm as he looked at Anez. I apologize for that. I wasn't careful. Oh yeah. Anez nodded and was just about to move away when the merchant leaned his face towards the group in the distance. If you could satiate my curiosity, who are they exactly? You don't know? Anez looked shocked at first, but then, recalling how this merchant introduced himself, he understood. Even though he didn't want to interact with him, Anez decided to fill him in on a few things. He did, after all, indirectly help him get first place today. Those are the Crimson Wraiths, one of the 7 lords of the Crimson Sea. 7 lords of the Crimson Seas? Yes, they're the 7 lords that dominate the Crimson Sea. If you wish to cross to the remnant south, then you must go through them. Only a few selected ships are allowed to cross the Crimson Sea. Inez glanced in the direction of the burly man. That man over there is Silas Red Veil Vane, captain of the Crimson Wraiths. Don't be deceived by his appearance. He may look like that, but he's a tier 8 and he's rather famous for his speed and deadly assassination techniques. He's also an illusionist, which means nothing you see from him can be trusted. The same goes for his crew. They're notorious for their brutal yet frighteningly precise kills. You should never cross paths with them. That's interesting. Rather than being shocked or even scared, a look of interest flashed across the merchant's features, prompting Inez to frown. Are you sure you're a merchant? Lazarus turned to face Inez with a smile, his head tilting slightly. And what makes you think I'm not? Everything about you. Inez looked at Lazarus up and down. You look and act like some sort of noble from the outer world. Not only that, but you also don't seem at all fazed by anything. Inez narrowed his eyes, studying the merchant intently. You ask me why I don't think you're a merchant. This is my reason. Lazarus stared at Inez with a slightly surprised expression. But very soon, his expression turned into one of amusement as his lips pulled up, and he leaned closer, whispering into his ear, I guess that makes the 2 of us, Mr. Emissary. Wah! The moment the merchant spoke, Inez snapped his head up, eyes wide with shock. How could he have known? His entire demeanor shifted, tension coiling through him. But before he could react, the merchant took a step back and pressed a finger to his lips. You don't want to do this here. He nudged his head towards the pirates in the distance, and Inez's face darkened. Every part of him burned with the urge to seize the merchant, to drag the truth from his lips through whatever means necessary. But with the eyes of dangerous company all around, he clenched his jaw and held himself back. Looks like you do know some self-control. The merchant smiled, finding a box and sitting down as he looked towards the distant group of pirates. Even now, he was still relaxed. So you're saying that in order for me to reach the South Remnant, I will have to somehow find a ship that these 7 lords approve of? Inez didn't answer. He felt that if he talked, he'd be playing right into the merchant's game. Just wait until they leave the port. It seems like you're thinking some useless thoughts. The merchant slowly turned his attention towards Inez once again. It was also in that moment that Inez felt a certain pressure he hadn't felt before coming from the merchant. His eyes flickering faintly. However, that flicker only lasted for a brief moment before his smile grew warm. Inez remained tense, unsure of the situation. For some reason, in that split second when his eyes flickered, he felt the back of his head tingle. As someone who had lived by the edge of death since young, he understood what had just happened. He was mere inches away from dying. This guy is not normal, and as quickly grew alarmed, his palms sweating. I need to report this to the temple. Someone as dangerous as him disguising himself as a merchant. He must have some hidden motives. But as if his thoughts were being read, the merchant laughed, slowly standing up while directing his gaze towards the distant pirates as they entered the city. He placed his hand over the young team leader, patting him twice. There's no use thinking about useless thoughts. I've been observing you for quite some time. I know quite a bit about you. Wah! You work for the Temple of the Goddess of Light as a team leader. You were only recently promoted, and now you have the ambition to rise to the Luminarch position. You are an orphan with no family, and the church took you in when you were young. Inez's pupils dilated upon hearing his words. How did he know? Most of the information was not something that anyone could simply figure out. How was this possible? The merchant laughed once again, patting Inez on the shoulder. You check out all the boxes. Careful, cunning, and knowledgeable. He nodded with a satisfied expression as he looked at Inez. The moment you took money from me was the moment you started working for me. Yes. The merchant patted Inez again, his voice warm. You are now my assistant. Chapter 6:17. The Grey Chamber Merchant Group. 2. Assistant? Working for you? Inez looked at the merchant, stunned. His expression a mix of confusion and bafflement. And then, as he properly registered the situation, his face changed, and his voice raised. How ridiculous! What sort of nonsense are you spouting? The disdain in Inez's face became all too clear. How could he not be baffled? Some random merchant he knew nothing about had appeared out of nowhere and declared him an assistant. As if that made any sense. This guy, he was a total lunatic. I can't gauge your strength, but I don't think you're anywhere near as strong as the 7 lords. It's also nothing. Why would I work for someone like you? What can you even provide me? I can EAS. At the rate that you're progressing, you'll be stuck in your rank for a very long time. Lazarus suddenly cut Inez off, his calm voice echoing quietly as he pulled his hand away from Inez's shoulder and sat back down on the wooden box by the pier. The merchant casually glanced at the sea. Like I said before, I know quite a bit about you. I've been closely watching you for some time and found enough information to know your current position. What sort of? You've only recently been promoted to the team leader rank. The average time that someone remains stuck in such a rank is about 5 years. If you do exceptionally well, you'll be promoted in 2 years. Ah. Inez was speechless. He couldn't find any words to argue back. No, but most importantly, how did he know so much? This information wasn't something that just anyone could know. What happens once you get promoted? You'll become a collector. How long do you think it will take for you to rank up to become a luminarch? Inez felt his lips become dry. The ranks for the temple were as such: acolyte, emissary, team leader, collector, clergy, high clergy, luminarch, soul arch, and radiant hierophant, or best known as the living saint. To rank up from collector to clergy doesn't just take merit. You need to display abilities befitting such a rank. With a casual glance in Inez's direction, the merchant shook his head. At your current tier 4 rank, there's simply no way for you to rank up to become a clergy. You'll need to develop a domain at the very least. Wait, how do you? Inez's eyes widened when he saw the merchant see through his strength with just a glance. However, before he could say anything more, Lazarus raised his hand and stopped him. It doesn't matter how I know. The only thing you need to know is that I can help you. What? Help? Inez's lips opened and closed as he struggled to find the right words. How could someone like him? Seeing his struggle, the merchant from afar smiled. Did I not say it before? I'm a merchant who comes from very far. I do have quite a few things that might come in handy for you. Who knows? He shrugged, closely looking at Inez. I might even be able to help you develop a domain. Hiss. Inez drew a cold breath upon hearing the merchant's words. Develop a domain? As if such a thing were easy. Especially in this treacherous place where everyone thought about their own benefit. For years, Inez had been stuck in the same rank, unable to develop a domain. This was something that nearly everyone struggled to develop. In fact, almost 90% of people remained stuck in the 4th tier, never capable of developing a domain. To most people, the 5th tier was the wall that separated the normal people from the talented. If there really was an item that could help him develop a domain, then there wouldn't be so many people stuck at such a level. Inez didn't buy his words. But what if? There was always that what if that lingered at the back of his mind. Who? Inez took a deep breath, calming his thoughts down. Though he was tempted to accept the offer, he still wanted to figure out what the motives behind the merchant were. There was no such thing as a free lunch. What exactly do you need from me? The merchant smiled at the question. Seems like I've managed to tempt you a little. Speak. Don't waste my time. Well, it's nothing much. The merchant crossed his legs while staring at the crimson sea before pointing towards the distance. Inez cocked his head in confusion. Ah, you wanted the sea? Remnant Soa. That's impossible. Inez immediately cut Lazarus off before he could finish his words. He didn't need to listen to his voice to understand what his goal was. He wanted to go to the Remnant South. The land where the Eclipsed Maw was. If your goal is to go to the Remnant South, I suggest you give up on the idea. Like I said before, the Crimson Sea is closely monitored by the 7 lords. Getting past them needs special boats, and such boats only come once every several months. The most recent boat just left. And even if it was here, getting a place on the boat is impossible. The Remnant South was an extremely dangerous place. It was where the Eclipsed Maw was located, and it was filled with all sorts of monsters. However, just as dangerous as the place was, it was also filled with opportunities. It was filled with all sorts of resources, and it was for this reason that the 7 lords prevented passage. They wanted to monopolize the resources for themselves. Each one of the lords is a monster of the 8th tier with hundreds, if not thousands, of crew members by their side. Trying to get to the Remnant South without their approval is like asking to get yourself killed. But that wasn't the scariest part. Even if you're strong, let's say tier 9, you'd still most likely lose. Not only do you need to take into account the number of crew members helping the lords, but you also need to take into account the environment. You're not fighting on land. You'll immediately be put at a disadvantage. There was a reason why nobody had been able to overthrow the 7 lords. Not only were they strong, but even if someone stronger showed up in the water, they were nearly invincible. There had been several instances in the past where a tier 9 had tried taking on one of the 7 lords only for them to lose miserably. It was such events that made everyone give up on the notion of fighting them. If your plan is to don't worry about that. In spite of Inez's warnings, the merchant remained calm, the same warm smile tugging at his lips as he stared at the distant Crimson Sea. I was aware of the circumstances from the start. Then, nothing. He slowly turned his attention towards Inez. I'll still stick to my plan, and you're coming with me. Me? What Like I said before, the moment you took money from me was the moment you became my assistant. I'll make sure you work your worth. You're crazy. Inez's voice rose, but the merchant ignored him and stood up, gently patting his clothes clean before turning around and moving towards the bazaar. Wait, where are you going? I told you I'm not You said the same thing the last time. Don't worry about that. I'll come find you when the time comes, my assistant. Ha! Last time? When did he? Oh, and don't even think about reporting me to the temple. This conversation we're having. It's not exactly the first. What? Wait, what do you mean? The merchant's finger pressed casually against his temple, his back to Inaz as he began walking away, his figure slowly melting into the crowd. Even as he disappeared, his voice lingered in Inaz's ears, sharp and unsettling. I'm capable of so much more than you think. I also know a lot. Things that you personally aren't even aware of, haha. It'd be best if you kept your mouth sealed unless you want all your hard work to go in vain. These were the last words Inaz heard before he disappeared completely. Inaz could only remain standing on the spot, his face frozen as his mouth opened and closed. What did? Work. I stopped inside a deserted alley within the city, pressing my hand against the side of the wall as my stomach lurched. A silver string flowed down from my mouth as my entire body shook. Shit. I stared at my trembling arm, my mouth pressing tightly. This is taking a bigger toll on me than I originally expected. Rustle. A sudden rustling echoed in the midst of my situation. Looking up, a black owl appeared not far from me. Are you okay, human? I can manage. I replied while forcing myself to stand upright and forcing myself back into my facade. But the moment I did, my stomach twisted again. This couldn't be helped. It was a reaction that came from my mind directly. It was rejecting what I was trying to do. But I had to do it regardless of whether I wanted to or not. This was the only way for me to reach the 5th level of emotive magic. Yes, this is all for that. I was not the same person as before. I no longer had the ability to spam the first leaf or the second leaf in order to improve my emotive magic. And even if I was capable, I knew that it wasn't enough for me to reach the 5th level. The 5th level was fundamentally different. The slow growth became painfully apparent to me. And that was when I realized. To reach the 5th level, I needed to do something different. I needed to be different. I couldn't stay as Julian or Emmett anymore. I had already experienced all there was to experience as them. To reach the 5th level, I needed to become someone else. To experience things from a different perspective. And as such, I became Lazarus. An elegant merchant from afar. But, who would have thought things would be this problematic? In order to experience things as someone else, I had to become them. I had to fully immerse myself in the persona. Making myself forget all about what I once was. It was hard and my body was rejecting it. But even so, I have to do it. In order to improve my emotive magic, this was a must, and as such, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath, I brushed my hair back and calmed down. This wasn't the first time I had done something like this. Perhaps all that acting in the past had been a foreshadowing of what was to come. Opening my eyes again, my lips slowly curled. I immersed myself once more. Chapter 618, The Grey Chamber Merchant Group 3. Look my way. Help me. It's burning. I can't shake away the pain. The mirror tunes echoed silently in the air, their voices drifting in and out of my mind as I focused on immersing myself into the character. I had just managed to do so when the tunes played again in my mind. Why is this happening to me? Where's this place? Unlike the tunes I was accustomed to near the academy or the safe zones near the empires, the tunes in this place were a lot louder. It almost felt as though they were screaming inside my mind. I wanted to make them stop. They were disrupting my concentration and making things harder for me. Walking out of the alley and moving past one of the windows, I caught sight of my own reflection staring back at me and then blinking. But I didn't blink. I know because I had purposely tried not to blink. Soon my reflection smiled and I looked away. I drew a deep breath. This wasn't my imagination. What I saw was real, and it wasn't because Julian had suddenly broken out of the seal that I had placed with the mirror. Far from it. This place. It was a lot more treacherous than originally anticipated. Everything about the city, people, and mirror dimension felt incredibly eerie. I could see why people would go crazy if they stayed in this place for long enough. I also wanted to leave, but I had a goal and a mission. Until I fulfilled my mission, I could only stay here. This should be the place. I stopped before a fairly sized building not far from the bazaar as a large glass window displayed a large room behind. The place was currently empty, but not for long, as I turned my head to see a chubby man with a mustache slowly make their way in my direction. He had a general greasy look to him that made me want to stay away. My apologies. You must be the buyer. The man dabbed his sweaty forehead with a clean white tissue. I was tending to another customer just now. I apologize if I couldn't make it quickly. That is all right. I've also just made it here myself. The language they spoke here was called Virith, and it was considered the universal language around these parts. Of course, because everyone came from all over the place, it was hard for everyone to speak the same language. It was the same for me. Thankfully, there were relics and devices that had the ability to translate languages smoothly. It was also for that reason that the empires never struggled to communicate. Of course, English was also included, although from what I understood, most English records were gone and could only be sparingly found in the mirror dimension. I wonder why they don't speak English here. It was an interesting thought, but there were more pressing matters at hand. I raised my head to look at the empty place before me. How much were you saying you'd rent this for? The price is about 3,500 salas per day. We do not offer any lower prices. Do you still wish to rent? 3,500 salas. Talk about daylight robbery. Salas was the currency used in the city and the regions under the jurisdiction of the goddess of light. The exchange between Salas and Rend was about 1 to 10, meaning that 3,500 Salas was equal to about 35,000 Rend. Just thinking about it pissed me off. However, these were the prices over here, and it wasn't as though it was too much for me. Before leaving for this place, I had made preparations in advance, storing a lot of things inside the ring. Noelle had also told me in advance about the things that would sell well here, and with that, I was able to bring enough items to open up a merchant house, which was what I was about to do. Will you take it? Yes. Sweet. The chubby man rubbed his hands and smiled. He then proceeded to take out a piece of paper from his pocket and started to fill in some details. For how long will you be renting this place? A week. A week? Okay. The man jotted down all the information. Is this individual work, or are you going to work as a commercial group? Commercial group. A merchant group, to be exact. Oh, what group? Grey Chamber Merchant Group. Understood. The man continued to jot down several things on the paper, asking several questions along the way before finally handing the paper to me. All details have been filled out. The goddess of light shall bear witness to our transaction. How do you wish to pay? I'll pay right here. I retrieved a fairly sized pouch and handed it to the chubby man, who took it with delight. He opened the bag and started counting the money. It's all there. Just have to make sure. I shook my head and turned my attention back towards the store. Staring at the empty frame of the place, I quietly sighed. This was quite a big investment. However, it was a necessary investment. This store was key to my plan to get to the remnant south. For that reason, this price was nothing. Furthermore, I was confident that I would make all the money back in no time. Yes, it is all there. Very well, I wish you a pleasant stay. The chubby man left shortly after. I didn't even bother bidding him farewell and just focused my attention on the store. After a while, I quietly moved in and looked around the place. With another sigh, I shook my head. This might take longer than I expected. Thankfully, I wasn't alone. It's time I get my assistant to work. Haven. About 4 months had passed since the events. It was now the start of the 3rd year. The number of cadets that entered the academy had reduced significantly as a result of the incident with the mirror crack and a few other events that had made the news. This was a source of trouble for the academy since its prestigious reputation was starting to decline, with several other academies starting to make a rise. This naturally brought quite a bit of panic amongst the elders of the academy, bringing up the topic in discussion with the chancellor several times. However, oh yeah, okay, do as you wish. The chancellor seemed wholly unmoved by the entire ordeal. In fact, it almost felt like she didn't care about the situation at all. But this was something big. If the academy fell down the rankings, then it would reduce the money that came through sponsorships significantly. This would be a massive blow to the academy since the maintenance costs were extremely high. Chancellor, you must listen to us. We need to do something about this situation quickly. Otherwise, we might be in some serious trouble. Oh. Sitting at the edge of a large oval table, Delilah casually glanced at the elders. Her dark pupils scanned the room before she leaned back on her chair. Her lack of interest made the elders want to rip their own hair out. The situation was especially bad when taking into consideration the fact that Atlas wasn't present. Ever since Julian's death, he had been on indefinite leave. He was the only voice that could somewhat reason with the chancellor. However, with him gone, the situation was a mess. All the elders could do was discuss things amongst each other. We need to think of a way to make everyone more attracted to the academy. There won't be a summit this year, and even if there is, I don't consider the chances of our academy dominating like in the last event to be very high. The quality of the students this year is significantly lower. Then we should focus more on the 2nd and 3rd years. You're right. They should be our primary focus. The 2nd years are promising, but they still lag behind the 3rd years in terms of talent. That's true, but with Julian gone. Oh, don't even remind me. Professor Chambers muttered, massaging his throbbing head. He was suddenly reminded of a certain incident that happened a few days ago. It was with regards to a year-wide party that said 3rd year lives matter. With the jinx gone, we can live. They, of course, were unaware of what had truly happened to Julian. However, the real trouble came from the moment Leon, Kira, Aoife, Kalian, Evelyn, and several of the top rankers in the year found out about the party. All hell broke loose. Chairs were thrown. Tables were thrown. Cadets were thrown. Oh God. That day, it rained cadets. A pure nightmare. That incident aside, they are now at a stage where they are stronger than even a large quantity of the professors within the academy. With their abilities, they'll without a doubt achieve something great. That's true. The elders nodded. And then, just as everyone was in deep thought, thinking about them, Professor Evenhart, the leading emotive mage within the academy and elder, spoke. But they still need to do their graduation trial, right? Graduation trial? Yes, that's correct. The graduation trial was essentially the test the cadets needed to take in order to graduate. From going into the borders to fight monsters to helping several places that had been hit by bandits or natural disasters, it was an event that was used to elevate the academy's status and at the same time display their ability. It was a very important event. What about the graduation trial? Why are you bringing it up? Because this might be the opportunity that we're looking for. HM? What do you, This year, cadets are far stronger and more talented than ever before. I can count over a dozen that are on the same level as the black stars of the previous years. Wouldn't it be a waste if we let them do some boring trial? Ah! The eyes of the elders suddenly widened. They were finally starting to see the picture. Right? You're right. If it's them, then I'm sure we can have them do something big. This might be able to enhance our reputation again. The eyes of the elders gleamed at the thought. However, pouring cold water was Professor Wallace, his finger lifting his golden spectacles. But how exactly are we going to do that? It's true that they're talented, but what can they do to catch the eyes of the world? The expressions of the few elders tightened upon hearing those words. Indeed, how could they make the trial challenging and rewarding enough to elevate their status? Just as the argument went on a brief stalemate, one of the elders hesitantly spoke. What if we were to send them deep into the mirror dimension? All eyes turned on the elder who spoke. Like send them deep into the mirror dimension? Have them survive inside a red zone for a certain period of time? I mean, the mirror dimension is the direct threat to our world and the reason we train the cadets. Wouldn't this make sense to prove that our teaching works? The room fell silent in that moment, all eyes stunned. Sending them to a red zone to survive? What? Although his words made sense, it was still ridiculous. This was just asking them to die. The elders were just about to reject the idea when a quiet voice suddenly spoke. Let's do that. All eyes suddenly fell on the Chancellor, her listless eyes gone. In their place was a certain gleam as she looked around the room. I'll personally supervise the event. Chapter 619, The Grey Chamber Merchant Group 4. Delilah stared at the wrapper in her hand, her brows knitting faintly. There, neatly tucked inside the wrapper, was her favorite chocolate bar. It was something she couldn't do without. Her addiction. Her obsession. And yet, it's tasteless. Taking a small bite of it, her deep eyes turned hollow. She couldn't taste anything. The explosion of sweetness and flavor that she once used to enjoy was suddenly gone. Like that. The one little joy that remained with her was gone. Tack. The chocolate bar fell onto her desk as her face blanked. In the meantime, a small crow appeared from behind her, secretly eyeing the chocolate bar as it cautiously looked in Delilah's direction before moving stealthily towards it. Its beak was just about to reach it when... Wham! Ach! The crow was suddenly thrown towards the other side of the room as Delilah blinked her eyes. Oh! She didn't even mean to do that. It was purely out of reflex. But that wasn't the issue at hand. The issue was her sudden inability to taste the second thing she adored the most. She didn't even need to think much to understand the reason for the sudden change. Delilah nibbled her lips, lowering her head to stare at the piece of paper nestled on her desk. Mirror Dimension Expedition. This was the finalized sheet detailing the graduation trial for the third year. The trial was going to take place in exactly 2 months, and in those 2 months, the cadets would be left in a red-ranked zone for a month or two. The goal was to survive there. Of course, this would be under her supervision. They were precious cadets. With their already bad reputation, they couldn't afford to have any of them die. This was especially so when taking into account that all of them had very important positions. Not just in the Nizansifa Empire but also in other empires. The third years were a diplomatic mess. The fact that this entire expedition needed the approval of the 4 empires was proof of this. But nonetheless, Delilah was going to make this happen. If he truly was alive then. I'll find him. Normally, she wouldn't be allowed to enter the mirror dimension by herself. Her position was quite important. She was a living weapon. Any action from her would make any empire wary. As such, entering the mirror dimension was a hard task for her unless it was strictly approved by Central and the Empire. This time, she felt that if she played her cards right, she'd be given access to the mirror dimension. And she was going to make sure it happened. Even if it meant using force. It had to happen. Delilah nibbled her lips again, turning her attention towards the chocolate bar on her desk. Her hand slowly curled into a fist as she retrieved a green book from her drawer. Opening the first page, a glaring title appeared. Julian Kerr's Diary. It was already filled with all sorts of bullet points. Thinking of how he had suddenly left and pretended to be dead, Delilah's hand trembled and she brought her pen down. She then began to write her curse. Stupid. Of course, one wasn't enough. She wrote another. Bastard. No, too mild. Cheater. That he was. Even though it was a misunderstanding, he was still a cheater. Bastard. Cheater. Stupid. Delilah filled the page with all sorts of curses. She went on like this for the next 10 minutes, wholly absorbed in this new hobby of hers. It was only during these times that she felt her emotions return. That she felt alive. And when she was finally done, she looked down at her diary. Her face changed subtly after. When? That was because she realized something. Somewhere in the middle, the curses changed into something else. And when she looked at the diary, all she saw were the same 3 words. I miss him. Delilah dropped her pen and looked away, her blank gaze focusing on the window of her office. Staring towards the blue sky above, her obsidian eyes flickered. If he really was alive. No, he was alive. She was now certain of it. The ring was perfect proof of that. Delilah's fist clenched tightly. Just see. At the same time, Virathanash. Within a certain shop, a calm voice echoed as several people moved furniture around the shop. Yes, you may move that there. MHM, that's... Lazarus stopped mid-sentence. Frowning, he looked around. For some reason, he suddenly started to feel chills. Was someone targeting him? Lazarus calmly looked around his surroundings but found nothing out of the ordinary. In the end, he shrugged and forgot all about it. This wasn't the first time he had felt like this in the mirror dimension where voices whispered in the air. Even now, he could still hear them. But Lazarus was able to ignore the voices without a problem. He was slowly starting to get accustomed to them. Still, there was something unsettling about the voices. The more he interacted with them, the more he felt them try to crawl into his mind. It was almost as if they were trying to take over his mind. If not for his high mental strength, Lazarus would have been put in a very dangerous situation. Clank. All of a sudden, the door to the shop opened and an all too familiar figure entered. Lazarus smiled as Inez came into the shop. "Ah, looks like you had no trouble finding your way here. Welcome." He looked happy to see Inez as he greeted him with a warm smile. On the other hand, Inez was anything but pleased. He didn't originally want to come. However, thinking about the previous conversation, he grew paranoid. He knew just how strict those of the temple were. If he had truly leaked anything to them, then his dream of being a Luminarch would shatter before he could even take a step towards it. He couldn't allow that to happen. He had to become a Luminarch. This was something that he couldn't compromise on. It was the very reason why he lived. The goddess was his everything. "It's a good thing that you've arrived. Things were getting quite hectic. Here you go." Bringing Inez out of his thoughts, Lazarus shoved a box into his hands. Umph. It was rather heavy. "Wait, why are you?" "I'm going to take a walk now. I've been working since early in the morning. I trust you can take care of things while I'm gone." "Eh?" Inez stood blankly, his mind lost. Then, staring at the merchant who suddenly turned away and walked towards the door, Inez snapped out of it and tried to call for him. "What, wait?" But it was too late. By the time Inez snapped out of it, Lazarus was gone, his figure blending in with the people of the city. "Shit." Inez cursed, his expression contorting. To make matters worse, just as he turned around to look at the shop again, he was met with several workers looking in his direction. "Where should I put this? Is this okay?" Inez wanted to rip his hair out in that moment. However, taking a couple of seconds to calm himself down, he started giving out some orders. "Yes, that's okay. Keep it there. That's fine." Thinking about it, this situation, it wasn't bad at all. Now that he was inside the shop without the merchant present, he could take his time to carefully analyze his goods to determine some clues about the merchant. However, a few seconds into his investigation, his expression changed. "This is..." Staring at the numerous goods that were within the many boxes around the shop, Inez felt a lump form in his throat. How could this? From bones that seemed to come from all sorts of monsters to finely woven cloths, rich and fresh ingredients, books, and relics. Inez felt his mind go blank upon seeing the goods that were present within each box. If he had to make a total estimate of the worth within each box, he'd find that not even the temple within the city would be able to possess such wealth. Inez felt his entire body shudder as he looked around, his eyes narrowing as he looked towards the workers. If he could see the items, then so could they. What if they wanted to take them? Eh? However, contrary to his expectations, the workers didn't even seem to be at all attracted by the items. No, it was more like they couldn't see them at all. What sort of situation was this? Inez covered his mouth. He felt the situation to be a lot more complicated than he had originally expected. Staring at the boxes, he felt a twitch in his body. He was tempted to take the items and run away. However, he was rational enough to understand that such action would only lead to his death. No simple person would be able to bring such goods here. In spite of his background, Inez was actually quite intelligent. The only reason he had managed to survive this far was because of it. Not luck, not strength, not even charm. Just his mind. He'd learned to read patterns in people, to smell lies the way others sniffed out wine. He could remember details like a sort of photographic machine. And right now, every instinct in that calculating brain of his told him this is dangerous. Not in the obvious way. Not the kind that came with monsters or assassins ready to snatch his head off at any given second. No, this was quieter. Like a chessboard already set and he'd arrived mid-game. It's obvious that once these goods hit the market, they'll attract the attention of a lot of bigwigs within the city. Taking into consideration that he wants to go to the South Remnant, could this be his goal? Did he want to use all of the fame and attraction that his store would bring in order to get one of the 7 lords to accompany him to the Remnant South? No, I don't think it's that simple. Inez shuddered the more he thought about the situation. He could feel it in every part of his bones. Something big was going to happen. Chapter 620, The Grey Chamber Merchant Group 5. Have you heard about the most recent shop that opened near the bazaar? Which one? Are you talking about the one from the Grey Chamber Merchant Group? That one. Then, of course, I've heard about it. Has anyone not heard about it? Virathanash was alive with activity, and on this particular day, a certain topic dominated the conversations of the city's people. It was about a shop that mysteriously appeared out of nowhere. One that seemed to offer things that hardly anyone had ever seen before. From fine silk items to clothes, relics, and even food. It had everything that one could dream of, all of which was of extremely high quality. As such, word spread and a massive line appeared on the inconspicuous-looking shop. Make sure to remain in line. Do not cut. If you cut, you will be immediately put on the blacklist and be refused access to the store. Standing at the entrance of the store was a worn-out Inez. While he had originally anticipated the store to become popular once it opened, he didn't expect it to be this popular. It was beyond anything that he could have ever imagined, and seeing the long line he could see no end of, he felt his stomach flip. Why am I even doing this? He was playing right into that merchant's hands by doing this. Not only that, he was also not getting paid. And yet, it wasn't as though he could leave as he wished. Inez had no choice but to remain close to the merchant. He was afraid he'd spill something, ruining his chances of ever becoming a luminarch. As such, even though he didn't want to do this job, he had no choice but to. There's no need to be restless. Line up properly. There's enough goods for everyone. In the midst of his shouts, Inez suddenly noticed several figures approaching in the distance, and his lips paused. He wasn't the only one to react as the long line of people gracefully moved out of the way, granting passage to a tall yet rather heavy man who was accompanied by several menacing-looking people arrogantly walking forward. Inez felt his entire body freeze at the sight of the people before him. It was the Crimson Wraiths. At the helm was none other than their captain, Silas Redveil Vane. "HM? Is this the place?" Coming to a stop before the store, his deep voice quietly rumbled across the surroundings as Inez felt his entire body stiffen. He's strong, really strong. Just standing next to him felt extremely suffocating. "It should be Captain. Look at the long line." "You're right." With a nod, the captain moved into the store, completely dismissing the pale-faced Inez. Clank. The door swung open to reveal a pristine-looking shop. 2 towering shelves ran along the walls, neatly stocked with all manner of goods. At the center of the room stood a counter with a register topped by a large sheet of paper. On the paper was a list of all the items that the shop provided. Oh my God! The moment the members of the Crimson Wraith entered, the customers within the store panicked. It took less than a second for them to drop whatever item they were holding and make a run for it. The captain smiled at the sight. This was going to save him a lot of trouble. He calmly walked towards the nearest shelf, scanning the items on display. He had only just laid his eyes on the first item when his brow rose. "This is..." He extended his hand and pinched the cloth in front of him. Just one touch and he was able to feel the smooth yet delicate texture of the finely colored cloth before him. Not only that, turning his head, he saw all sorts of goods he had never seen before. There was also a small plate of tasting items, and when the captain tasted one of the items on the tasting board, his eyes couldn't help but show certain glints. "It's delicious." He didn't bother with any courtesies and finished all of the items to taste. "Wow, Captain. Look at this. It's amazing. Oh my God. Can't you feel the texture of this? I've never felt something like this before." The captain wasn't the only one to show surprise and delight at the presented items. The other pirates also showed similar reactions as they found themselves unable to hide their excitement. Looking at them, Silas slowly turned his attention towards the counter. Or more specifically, towards the man sitting behind the counter, his head slightly lowered as he calmly read a book. As if sensing his gaze, the man adjusted his glasses before turning his attention towards Silas and smiling. His lips parted and a charming voice flowed out of his lips. "I take it that you're satisfied with the items provided by our shop. Is there anything that I can do to help you?" "Yes, actually." Silas moved closer towards the merchant and pressed his hand against the counter. The atmosphere within the room grew tense the moment he did so, and as he looked around the place, he laid his gaze on the merchant once more. "The goods over here? Where did you get them?" Though his words seemed more like a simple question, the moment they left his lips, the already tense atmosphere turned frigid. It was enough to make anyone freeze on the spot. "And yet..." "Haha." The merchant laughed. Yes, he laughed. This brought the atmosphere to a standstill. Was he really laughing? Was he not aware of who exactly was standing before him? "Oh, I apologize for that." Raising his hand, the merchant apologized before settling his book down. "I didn't mean to laugh. It was just the way you were talking about the items and acting. It almost made it seem like you wanted to take them all for yourself." Silas's eyes narrowed as he stared at the merchant. On any normal occasion, if someone spoke to him like that, he'd have killed them in an instant. However, something about the merchant's calm gaze and voice made him hesitant. But that wasn't all. He could also tell that the items present weren't ordinary. He could tell that they came from afar. Perhaps the land outside. However, the distance between the land outside and Virathanash was extremely far. To be able to bring so many goods over, it surely wasn't something that just anyone could do. These thoughts were the only things that were keeping him in check. He wasn't just here for the goods. He was here to learn more about this mysterious merchant. A smile soon marred Silas's features. "Is that so? I guess I may come off like that given the way I look." "Well, you certainly do look quite intimidating." "Ha ha." Silas's boisterous laugh echoed throughout the room as he looked around and grabbed a chair, placing it near the counter and sitting down while staring straight at the merchant. "You still haven't answered my question. Where did you manage to get these items from? I can see that they aren't ordinary." The merchant merely smiled and shook his head. "That's a trade secret." "Trade secret?" Silas was just about to frown when he stopped himself. "Very well. Everyone must have their own secrets. If you don't wish to tell me, that is okay. I appreciate your understanding. It's nothing." Silas dismissively waved his hand. Then, looking around the place, he asked, "How much for all the goods here?" Everything? Yee. 30 million Salas, give or take. Silas's entire body stiffened. 30 million? What sort of ridiculous number was this? Taking into consideration all of the items that were offered, while he could see them being worth a lot, none of them were truly of any use. Silently clenching his fist, Silas tried to maintain a smile as he looked at the merchant. You can't lower the price? It cannot be done. I see. Silas gradually stood up from his seat, his tall frame casting a shadow over the calm merchant. Just by standing, he emitted an extremely powerful and vicious pressure. And yet, it still did not arouse any reaction from the merchant. This made Silas close his eyes and nod his head. Very well then. He twirled his finger in the air. I'll take everything. The merchant's smile grew then. Very well then. He stood up and looked around the room. Do you wish to pay now? The most I can wait is a day before waiting for the payment. In the meantime, I'll need you to give me a down payment in case you do not fulfill the end of your deal. This is so that I don't make a loss on the rent. Silas's mouth twitched upon hearing the merchant speak. He was truly a merchant through and through. He quietly pretended to nod to his every demand before extending his hand towards the merchant. I understand. I'll comply with everything that you've mentioned. I hope for a happy cooperation. The merchant paused, lowering his head to stare at Silas's hand. For a split second, the smile faded from his face. But it was only for a split second. Enough to make anyone doubt whether they had seen things or not. The same was for Silas, who licked his lips. Don't tell me he noticed something. His brows furrowed, and just as he was about to say something, the merchant brought his hand forward and grasped his hand. To a happy cooperation. And so, an agreement was struck. Within the following day, Silas was to deliver 30 million Salas to the merchant. Failure to do so would nullify the deal, and he would forfeit a deposit of 100,000 Salas. Clank. Coming out of the store, under the gaze of all the people present, Silas slowly moved away. It was only when he was far away enough that his crew members rushed towards him. Captain, why did you agree to the deal? Why are you spending so much money on goods like that? Isn't it a waste? Captain. They were clearly distressed by the transaction, and Silas couldn't blame them. This was a lot of money, and they usually took money, never gave it away. He quickly raised his hand to stop them from speaking. Don't worry, I'm not interested at all in buying that crap. Eh? You're not? Then. I just wanted to check something. Silas lowered his head to stare at his hand, his lips slowly pulling up. I found him. The last ingredient to his ascension. Moments after Silas left and as quietly slipped into the store, his face stiff as he looked around. Eventually, seeing the merchant completely unharmed, his expression grew grave. He was able to survive? Anaz was just about to call for the strange merchant when he suddenly stopped. No, rather than stop, it was more like he couldn't move at all. His pupils suddenly trembled, and just as he was about to open his lips, he saw the merchant turn his head, their eyes meeting. It was in that moment that Anaz saw it. The emptiness. He saw the emptiness in his gaze. In that moment, he seemed like a doll. A doll without personality. What sort of? Chapter 621, Exe Rule 1. Anaz tensed from head to toe as he stared into those lifeless eyes. They were hollow, devoid of anything that would make anyone human, and staring into them, Anaz felt as though he was staring directly at a doll. A lifeless doll without an ounce of thought. But that feeling quickly faded as the merchant's eyes flickered back to life. He looked at Anaz as though nothing had happened. Ah, you're here? His calm smile almost felt creepy. Yes. Anaz nervously answered. For some reason, facing the merchant in front of him, he felt cold sweat trickling down his back. Something about the image from before remained stuck in his mind, leaving his throat dry. A thought occurred to him then. He couldn't possibly be a hallowed, right? His stomach flipped at the thought. However, he quickly shook his head. No, if he was, the captain would have easily have detected it. Anaz took a quiet breath, trying his best to calm his mind. The mirror dimension was an extremely cruel space with danger lurking everywhere. Hallowed were humans that had been possessed by the voices. They were humans in every sense of the word, but at the same time weren't. They were merely walking bodies that were ensnared by the voices. They were dangerous entities that preyed upon people, using them as a means to fuel their growth. The merchant before him exhibited similar symptoms to a hallowed. But was he one? Anaz couldn't tell. Every hint or clue suggested to the case, but at the same time Anaz felt that it wasn't the case. Taking into consideration the goods that he had managed to bring, he wasn't lying when he said he came from afar. But where exactly did he come from, and what was his goal? We can start closing shop now. Closing? Anaz snapped out his thoughts, his eyes blinking rapidly as he looked outside the shop, where a long line was still present. They were all trying to peer into the shop, probably curious about the situation inside now that Silas had left. What? Why? Because we're all sold out. What? Anaz's eyes widened. Sold? When? Oh, wait. It was then that Anaz was reminded of who had just entered, and his expression tightened. Could it be? No, don't worry. The goods have been sold. The kind man who came before bought everything in the store. That? Anaz's lips trembled. Kind man? Silas was anything but kind. Simply put, he was the type of person who took whatever he wanted. The fact that the shop was still intact was a surprise in itself. Then again, he was currently within the jurisdiction of the temple. Even he had to be cautious with them. If he really did something like that, he'd be permanently kicked out of the city and all areas under the goddess of light. Still, Inez felt the need to share the situation with the merchant. I'm sure you've already guessed who that was. You've got your glasses on after all. Long story short, he's not paying. He was likely here to size you up or for something else entirely. I know. The merchant answered with his usual calm smile. He didn't seem to be at all bothered by the situation, prompting Inez to frown. He really couldn't understand this man. Then why? The merchant laughed, sitting down on his chair and taking out a book before flipping to a certain page. As he did, he adjusted his glasses. I like it when people take money from me. Ah, like it when people take money. What sort of logic was this? But then, as if suddenly recalling something, Inez grew stiff as he saw the merchant's lips pulled higher. You know it best, don't you? Inez swallowed, his throat tightening. I get along really well with those that take money from me. Hearing the words, Inez felt his lips tremble. He finally understood what the merchant was hinting at and his entire expression crumbled. He's a complete lunatic. How could he even? No, this was a recipe for disaster. Silas wasn't just anyone. He was a bona fide Tier 8 captain with years of experience. He wasn't someone that just anyone could talk to. And yet he was planning on working with someone like that? Lunatic. He was a total lunatic. The worst part of all of this was the fact that Inez had been somewhat aware of the merchant's plan all along. It was just that he only expected him to use his fame to get the captain to help him get to the remnant south. However, it seemed like he had grossly underestimated the merchant's greed. Inez wanted to say something but eventually held himself back. He understood that whatever he said would go on deaf ears. As such, he could only let out a breath and shake his head. It was also in that moment that he caught a glimpse of the book in the merchant's hand. Exerul, the one who rests beneath. His brows furrowed at the sight. Exerul was a rather famous figure in the region. In fact, it was rather famous all over the mirror dimension. After all, it was one of the few existing primordial within the entire mirror dimension. Ruler of the Crimson Sea, anyone who came into contact with Exerul was never able to recall its appearance. It was almost as if all information about it had been completely erased from their minds. Its size, its appearance, its nest, it was all a mystery. However, the only thing that wasn't a mystery was its strength. Just a casual movement from it could wipe out the entire city of Verithanash. Exerul was also one of the main reasons why the Seven Lords were able to dominate the Crimson Sea. After all, the water they floated on was the only part where Exerul didn't show up. Only by going through that path could one make it to the remnant south. Inez raised his brow while looking at the merchant. Could this be the reason why he was looking at the book? Dong. Dong. A loud toll suddenly echoed in the air, and Inez's head flicked in the direction of the toll. His expression changed dramatically when he saw it came directly from the temple, and as he turned to look at the merchant, he hastily excused himself. I'm leaving. He didn't wait for the merchant to speak. He just turned on his heel, slipped out of the store, and hurriedly changed into his team leader's garb, pulling on the gray robes and settling the mask over his face. Of course, he made sure to change in a secluded area where no one was around. There were very few times when the bell rang. However, in the time that the bell did ring, it meant that something big was about to happen, and as such, Inez made sure to change as fast as possible. By the time he arrived at the temple, he could see that the place was packed. There were all sorts of emissaries, collectors, as well as team leaders. He could see them looking at the temple's bell with grim expressions. What in the world happened? Why did the bell ring? Did something happen within the temple? Did someone die? Could it be one of the Seven Lords finally overstepped their boundaries? All manner of talk and murmur filled the air as they stepped into the temple, its vast halls of dark stone and marble echoing with voices, while a faint red glow from the towering mosaic windows above washed over the gathered crowd. The noise continued for the next several minutes until a certain step echoed throughout the temple. It was just a step, and yet it seemed to echo above all the chatter and noise within the temple. All sound fell away as every eye turned to the figure emerging from the temple's inner sanctum, their pristine white robes and gleaming golden mask stark against the sea of followers. Inez felt his breath quicken at the sight of the central figure, his blood pumping as he silently grabbed his chest. That was a Luminarch. Welcome everyone. A gentle voice quietly transmitted into the mind of everyone present. It was calm and brought a certain sense of peace amidst the panic that had previously spread across the entire room. I understand that everyone present is currently worried about the situation. However, the situation is still manageable as of now. We just gathered all of you here in advance to prevent the situation from turning into the worst-case scenario. The Luminarch looked around, his eyes scanning the entire room. Eventually speaking again, his voice grew a little somber. We have detected a potential red tide. The faces of many changed, including Inez. He was well aware of what the red tide was. It was one of the worst possible things that could happen to the city. From the sudden rise of the waves that would reach dozens of meters to the monsters that would come along with it. It was a massive disaster that almost threatened to shake the very foundations of the city with each time it came, which was usually every 100 years. Wait. Inez frowned, his mind sorting through all of the information in his mind. Eventually, he felt the breath leave his body as he suddenly recalled that the previous tide had occurred just 20 years ago. For there to be another one so soon. Indeed, this red tide isn't a naturally made one. This is a premeditated event that we're currently trying to investigate. The Luminarch's words brought the entire room to a freeze. Premeditated event? Taking into consideration the danger of the event alongside the grand scale of it, everyone in the room struggled to understand how such an event could be artificially created. At least, most people struggled to understand. And as on the other hand was knowledgeable enough to gain a certain idea, and his expression changed drastically. Exerule? Exerule. The Luminarch's gaze swept the entire place, his presence radiating a terrifying gloom. Someone is trying to provoke the primordial one, Exerule. And as his entire body shook at the words, his mind joggling back to the scene from before. To the time when he was in the shop and he caught a glimpse of the merchant's book. Ho. Surely. Chapter 622, Exerule 2. A fluttering sound echoed within the confines of the empty store as an owl materialized from out of nowhere, nestling itself on top of the wooden counter. Sensing the owl, Lazarus placed the book in his hands onto the counter and smiled. Did you notice anything strange? Yes. Almighty frowned a little as it replied. It was still having trouble getting accustomed to Julian's sudden change. From the way he carried himself and spoke, he was slowly starting to feel like a completely different person. But Almighty understood the reason for Julian's actions. If this was to help himself grow and become stronger, then Almighty was prepared to help and support Julian. Just like he had done for it. I've noticed a sudden shift in the tides. The sea level has risen and is showing signs of rising more. The nearby monsters have also started to grow restless. Something big is coming. Lazarus covered his mouth and started to ponder. He had read a lot of books over the past several months, and as such, he was quite knowledgeable in a lot of the things that were happening. Hearing the details from the owl, a possibility crossed Lazarus's mind. Red tide. Only such an event seemed to fit all the descriptions detailed by Almighty. And if that were the case, then the situation appeared a lot more serious than expected. Not only was the red tide incredibly dangerous, but it was also not supposed to happen for several dozen more years. Something was clearly off about the situation. But what exactly could the reason be? Deep in thought, Lazarus was about to reach for another book that might have information about the situation when the door to the store suddenly opened. Almighty's figure faded from the spot. Clank. And as entered the store in a rush, his expression twisted. You. He raised his hand and pointed it at Lazarus. You did this, didn't you? You're the one who was creating all of this mess. I saw it. I saw it all. Oh. Rather than being shocked or surprised by Anaz's sudden actions, Lazarus remained calm. He just casually leaned back on his chair while looking at his assistant. Before he could get any word out, Anaz shifted his attention towards the book he was previously reading. That right there? He pointed at the book. Do you think I wouldn't remember that? This book. Lazarus shifted his attention towards the book on the counter. Exerule, the one who rests beneath. A look of realization soon crossed his features. Ah, that. And as his body grew tense, the mana in his body circulated quickly as he prepared to attack at any given second. He couldn't allow anyone to do any harm to the land of the goddess. He was prepared to use his body to end things quickly. However, instead of the reaction he expected to receive from the merchant, all he was met with was a subtle laugh. Ha! This made Anaz frown. Why are you laughing? Instead of answering immediately, Lazarus covered his mouth before shaking his head. There were subtle hints of disappointment in his voice as he spoke. I had previously chosen you because you were smart, but I'm starting to think that I made the wrong decision. What Did you seriously come here accusing me of masterminding some massive secret plot involving the great primordial one, just to damage the city and the temple? Anaz licked his lips, his mouth dry. No, you could have other motives. Such as? I. Lazarus raised his hand to stop Anaz from speaking. All right, let's say you're right and I'm the mastermind behind all of this. What exactly do you think you're going to achieve by marching all the way over here just to tell me you figured it out? Didn't it ever occur to you to lie low, quietly spy on me, and actually find out what I was planning? Or, I don't know, maybe bring backup instead of showing up here all by yourself? The more Lazarus spoke, the more Anaz felt himself grow breathless. Everything that he was saying was correct. They were all the things that he should have done and yet failed to do. Instead, he had so naively run back to the merchant and spilled everything. Anaz felt his heart sink. This was his one true weakness and the reason why his chances of becoming a Luminarch were low. It was because of his impulsiveness and blind devotion to the goddess of light. To him, she was his everything. His saving grace in his worst moments in life. She was the one who accepted him despite the dirty blood flowing inside his body. She meant everything to him. And that was why whenever something that threatened the goddess and her power occurred, he'd lose all rationality. You're lucky. The merchant quietly stood up, walking towards Anaz and standing right before him. It was only now that the two stood in front of each other that Anaz noticed the disparity in their heights. The merchant, he was almost a head taller than him while he was scrawny in comparison. But this wasn't something that he could control. His lack of nutrition and diet had resulted in his stunted growth. And even then he was faring much better than the vast majority of the people in the city. Had it been anyone else and you would have probably have had your head flying. Thankfully, I'm quite the forgiving person. I'll give you one more chance. Lazarus placed his hand over Inez's shoulder, his eyes narrowing into slits as Inez felt a certain coldness run through his body. It was almost as though his entire body had been plunged into the depths of the cold ocean. Thankfully, the sensation didn't last for very long as Lazarus removed his hand shortly after. And it was only then that Inez felt his breath return, cold sweat trickling down his back as he took deep and heavy breaths. "Ha!" Ha! Without glancing at him, the merchant walked towards the windows of the store and looked towards the streets. "A red tide will be coming soon, and given the information that you've told me, it seems that some sort of organization or person is trying to stir up trouble with the great primordial one in order to cause trouble to this land." Lazarus caressed his chin, his eyes hazy as he was lost in thought. On the other hand, Inez slowly started to recover his breath, staring at the merchant's back with a complicated expression. In that moment, he had almost felt death's touch. He had really been close to dying. And that made the merchant before him even more enigmatical in his eyes. By now, if it wasn't already clear before, it was quite clear to him that he was no regular merchant. He was definitely hiding something. But Inez felt it was impossible for him to figure out. Right now, he could only quietly submit while trying to learn more about the situation. His only loyalty lay with the goddess. Nobody else could take it. To provoke the great primordial one. These people sure are very ambitious. Lazarus cracked a smile at the thought. As far as he had read, Exerul was a creature that even the 7 lords of the seas avoided at all costs. It was probably a figure that the woman from the academy would struggle to fight against. Monsters always tended to be a little stronger than humans when they were of the same rank. The same was true for a monarch against a primordial one. This is a very interesting situation. Lazarus turned his attention back towards his assistant who had slowly started to recover. "Are you feeling better?" "A little." "That's good then." Lazarus reached for the door of the store and slowly opened it, allowing the dry air of the city to filter into the store. "Since the appearance of the red tide will be quite troublesome for me and what I have planned, how about we go and check the situation out?" Check the situation out?" Enes blinked his eyes, at a complete loss. It took him a few seconds to finally realize what Lazarus was trying to say, and his eyes widened. "Wait, you're saying we should investigate the ones responsible for this?" "Yes, why not? But that's the temple's duty. There's a chance it might interfere with their work and we might get mistaken for it. I don't want to hear it." Lazarus raised his hand and stopped Inez from speaking. Looking around, he took a step forward and headed down the street. Inez could only stare at his back for a short moment before clenching his teeth and following from behind. Investigating the situation might be very dangerous. We might lose our lives. Don't you think that a decision like this should be made with more caution? It's also wise to work with the temple. If it's them... Lazarus stopped, his gaze falling on Inez, who suddenly stopped talking. The silence carried until the merchant smiled. "You." Inez bit his lips and lowered his head in resignation. He could see that anything else he said regarding the situation would only arouse his anger. The only thing he could do was walk behind him in silence. That was until he recalled something. About the book from before. The one about the great primordial one, Exerul? Yes. Inez nodded. "Why were you reading that?" Inez was really curious. The timing felt a little odd to him. What were the chances that such a coincidence would occur? "About that. It's really nothing noteworthy. I was just curious about its abilities and its bone. What sort of abilities would it give me if I took it?" "Eh?" Inez suddenly stopped, his gaze fixed on the walking merchant as he covered his mouth, his heart pressed tightly against his throat. "That? It couldn't be, right?" As if sensing his sudden shift, Lazarus turned back and looked at Inez before cracking a smile. "Why do you look like someone who has seen a ghost?" "I was just joking. I know my limit. There's no way I can get a primordial ranked bone." Shaking his head while mumbling things like, "I'd rather sell it if I have it. I bet it would give me enough to buy a city, haha." Listening to him, it really did seem like he was joking. And yet, Inez felt something sink deep into his stomach. For whatever reason, he really struggled to believe him. Chapter 623, The Hidden Horror, 1. The crimson sea stirred, its surface rippling as if breathing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the water crept higher along the sea barrier made out of dark stone, the ships docked by the port swaying faintly in the water. Bells jingled through the bazaar as an unusual, faint breeze drifted across the city. The atmosphere within the city was somber. The shops started to close and the people started to disperse. News of the red tide had already started to make way across each of the citizens, making them drop everything as they all rushed away from the city. They could only pray to the goddess, hoping she'd protect them from this upcoming tragedy. "If you haven't moved out yet, I suggest you do so now. We cannot protect you from the upcoming tide. A red tide is coming." Those from the temple moved across the city, spreading word everywhere. They were merely warning the citizens. Whether they moved out or not wasn't something they cared very much about. They were only trying to get them out of the way so that they wouldn't be a hindrance later down the line when the tide arrived and the fight began. "Hey, the red tide is coming. You should leave." One of the temple members spun around, shouting at a pair of figures strolling along the edge of the port where red waves splashed against their shoes. His cries earned only a few fleeting glances before the strangers moved on, ignoring him entirely. "Don't tell me I didn't warn you?" The emissary turned around, focusing his attention elsewhere. In the meantime, Inez turned towards Lazarus. What do you plan on achieving by walking here? I understand that you want to investigate the matter, but walking by the port won't get us anywhere. Inez glanced around as they walked along the port, the black stone slick with red where the water sluggishly receded back into the sea. In the distance, ships bobbed and rocked, swaying uneasily in the restless harbor. A pungent smell of iron mixed with salt lingered in the air as the two walked. What if we work with they? What are their motives? What? Lazarus suddenly cut Inez off, his eyes fixed towards the sea in the distance. His expression appeared relatively calm, but he was in fact deep in thought. In order to figure out the ones responsible for all of this, he needed to have an idea of what their goals and motives were in trying to stir trouble with the great primordial one. Could it be some sort of plot against the goddess of light? This seemed to be the most probable scenario. Virathanash was a major city under the goddess's jurisdiction, also known as the Land of Light, which covered the entire remnant south and the land on the outskirts of the Crimson Sea. From what he had managed to read, the world within the mirror dimension was complex and layered. Power was largely held by the gods, with the notable exceptions of Oracleus and Mortem. Each god ruled over their own jurisdiction, complete with distinct laws, religions, economies, languages, and systems of governance. It wasn't uncommon for there to be conflicts between the lands. Could this be a plot by one of the other lands? Other lands? Inez frowned, thinking for a moment before understanding the implication behind the merchant's words. He wanted to refute his words at first, but found himself unable to. It's possible. The relationship between the other lands wasn't exactly harmonious. There had been many instances in the past when one land interfered with another's, resulting in great damage to occur. At first, everyone was worried that the gods might interfere in such matters, but that never occurred. The gods simply did not care for what happened between them. In fact, it was almost as though they encouraged such actions. It's possible? Then why do you think they'd be doing it? Inez shook his head. I'm not sure. It could be revenge. It could be an attempt to slow the growth of the Land of Light or to cripple us entirely. Maybe it's something else altogether. It's hard to say. I see. Lazarus remained calm even after hearing Inez's words. He fell deeper into thought, and just as they neared the harbor, he stopped, his gaze falling over one of the street lights by the port. It was there that he saw it. A missing poster. Missing. If you have any information, please contact the temple immediately. A suitable reward will be offered to anyone who can locate this man or provide information leading to his whereabouts. On it was a small description and an image. Lazarus's eyes flickered as he stared at the poster. He slowly reached out for it and ripped it from the post. A missing poster? Inez, on the other hand, didn't think much of it. In the city, he had seen many such powers. This is honestly quite common. You shouldn't think too much when you see this. There are a lot of people who go missing, either from falling into the sea or by messing with those pirates. Nobody really pays much attention to them. Inez thought the merchant would leave things there, but contrary to his belief, he pocketed the missing sign and walked over to another where another sign appeared. This time, there was an image of a young woman. A woman? Inez grew a little curious as he looked at the paper. Even then, it was merely a curious look. He didn't understand why the merchant was spending time looking at the missing papers. However, he didn't say much else and just followed along, watching as he picked up sign after sign. He doesn't seem like someone who would do things randomly. I should just watch in silence and see what he's planning. Inez had observed enough to understand that this was the best course of action instead of just questioning everything that he did. And even if he did ask, the merchant wouldn't respond, so staying silent was the way to go. That was what he did for the next few hours. Before they knew it, the two of them were holding on to quite a few missing signs, only coming to a stop on a certain wooden bench where they dropped the papers. This is quite a lot. Inez looked through the list, his expression growing a little grim. It was only now that he was seeing the number of missing signs that he realized just how many people went missing in the city. Was their security really that bad? He was just about to say something when the merchant pointed towards a certain paper. This guy. Inez looked where Lazarus pointed. His next words made his brows shoot up. He came to the store yesterday. It says right here that he went missing 2 days ago. Eh? Inez looked at the paper in shock. He had also been present during the shop's run, and he had seen many faces in the process. Staring at the picture, he indeed felt that he had seen it before. Could he have been found? Maybe. Lazarus skipped to another page before pointing it out as well. Does this face look familiar? This. It did. What about this one? Yes. And this one. Ah. Inez slowly raised his head as he looked at the merchant. His jaw grew a little slack as he started to realize that hardly anyone within the picture was missing. In fact, most of the people depicted were all found. What could this mean? Lazarus sat down on the bench, his hand massaging his chin as he fell into thought. Either the temple is incredibly efficient or something else is occurring. For them to return almost on the same day or after being reported missing, it's too much of a coincidence. The merchant slowly turned his head towards Inez. Did the temple not notice anything strange? Surely they must have. No. Inez wanted to say yes, but he knew that answer. They didn't notice a single thing. In fact, I don't even think that the temple knows that some of the people here are not missing at all. Oh, but that's because of the sheer number of people that go missing every day. That's why they didn't notice a thing just yet. But I'm sure they will if you give them more time. In fact, I should probably report this to them right now. Stay. Lazarus stopped Inez before he could run off to the temple. Reporting this to the temple might have undesired effects. Inez swallowed, understanding the subtle meaning behind the merchant's words. He held his breath as Lazarus flicked his finger over the missing pages. For the temple to have missed this, there are only two possibilities. 1, they're incompetent. Or 2. Lazarus stopped there, but the meaning got across Inez, who closed his eyes. Or the temple itself could have been compromised. Inez's expression darkened as he considered the situation. If that was indeed the case, caution was no longer optional. He knew without a doubt that whoever was behind this was anything but ordinary. Hearing the merchant make a surprised sound, Inez opened his eyes to see the merchant looking towards a certain direction. He slowly turned his head to see where he was looking, and he paused. But only for a brief moment as he flicked his head back towards the bench and picked up one of the posters. This. He alternated his gaze between the poster and the person in the distance. His long hair fluttered under the faint breeze as he stood by the edge of the port, his gaze directed towards the crimson sea in the distance. After checking for the third time, Inez was sure. Without a doubt, the person standing by the port was none other than one of the missing people. He was just about to move in his direction when he was stopped by a certain hand. What? He's Inez was just about to protest when he suddenly saw the figure turn its head toward him, the movement unnervingly slow. As it did, its eyes locked with their eyes. They were completely white, devoid of any emotion or life. Inez felt his breath freeze, his chest tightening, as if the very air had been sucked from his lungs. And just when he thought things couldn't get any creepier, the figure moved forward, its body folding into a limp, lifeless fall as it threw itself into the sea below. They were soon swallowed by the red beneath. Splash. Chapter 624, The Hidden Horror 2. What the hell? Inez was just about to rush to the edge of the port dock when Lazarus stopped him, his expression still calm. Don't be hasty. Inez opened his mouth but soon stopped himself. The merchant was right. There was no need for him to be so hasty. The situation was extremely abnormal and rushing would only do more harm than good. I understand. Inez sat down on the bench, his gaze still lingering over the spot where the figure was previously standing. Splash. The waves splashed against the edge of the seawall, the water splashing all over with a deafening roar. Inez could only wait in silence while Lazarus kept his gaze fixed on the spot where the figure jumped. Inez was curious to understand what he was trying to do, but he decided to remain silent while Lazarus lowered his head slightly. His eyes flickered as he saw the faint outline of a figure stirring just below the water, waiting for something. Lazarus's lips slowly pulled upwards at the sight. So he's waiting. It was unfortunate that he could see right through him with his skill, mana sense. Had the two of them jumped for him after, they would have most likely have fallen into its trap. Lazarus kept his gaze fixed on the silhouette beneath the water, waiting for it to slowly pull away. And sure enough, after 20 minutes, his eyes finally saw movements coming from the figure as it dove deep into the water, sinking into its depths. Okay, we can start moving now. Lazarus stood up from his seat, startling Inez, who had been waiting the entire time. Where are we going? Where? Lazarus laughed, his eyes fixing onto the distant water. Into the water, of course. Ha! Ignoring the stunned expression on Inez's face, Lazarus moved to the edge of the sea wall and looked down. The water was just a few meters below and the waves were starting to rage on. Water splashed across his face, the metallic scent lingering in his nose as he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, splash! He dove down into the water. Wait! Inez's voice echoed loudly behind him, but by then it was already too late as he was soon swallowed up by the water, its cold body embracing him from all directions. Falling into the crimson waters, his body lay weightless and suspended. Almost as if he were back in his mother's womb, but instead of warmth, all he felt was coldness. Lazarus opened his eyes, and what he saw was nothing short of unnerving. An endless sea of red surrounded him, the color suffocating, pressing in from every direction. The deeper he looked, the darker it became, as if the ocean itself was really made of blood. The world around him was still, the silence adding to the sense of suffocation. But the silence was soon shattered by a splashing sound as Lazarus turned his head to see Inez appear beside him. His eyes were closed and his finger pinched his nose. Staring at the sight, Lazarus smiled. Even though he always seems to disagree with me or wants to get the temple involved, he still follows me. Lazarus was happy. In the end, his eyes didn't deceive him. He had truly found himself the perfect assistant. If not for his strange obsession with the goddess, he would have been perfect. Lazarus waited for Inez to open his eyes before pointing down. His gesture was simple and Inez instantly understood what he was trying to say. We're going down. Inez shook his head, but Lazarus ignored him and circled his arms around the water, pushing himself down. Either way, he was still going to follow. And sure enough, Inez followed. Diving down, Lazarus's eyes were still focused on the faint silhouette in the distance as it moved deeper and deeper into the depths of the Crimson Sea. I hope this won't last for long. I don't know how long I'll be able to hold my breath. There were still some concerns as Lazarus dove deep into the water. His main concern stemmed from his inability to breathe. Had he been a body user, he would have been able to hold his breath for much longer, but as a mind and elemental mage, his body wasn't very strong. But in spite of this, his body was still much stronger than a regular human. If he had to make an estimate, he could probably hold his breath for about 10 to 20 minutes. Taking into account the time that it would take for me to go back up, I'll need to give myself enough time to make it back up before running out of oxygen. Lazarus quickly calculated his current situation before diving deeper into the depths of the sea, the darkness around him turning even more pronounced as the cold clung to his skin from all sides, almost as though 1,000 cold skinny fingers were brushing against his body. The deeper he went, the greater the pressure became, and his chest started to feel tighter, as though the very water was trying to crush the air from his lungs. From time to time he'd turn around to check on Anaz to see how he was faring. For now he still appeared to be okay. In fact, he appeared to be doing better than he was. Lazarus nodded, diving deeper into the depths of the ocean, the silence around him starting to feel more and more suffocating. He continued to follow the silhouette, his gaze never leaving it. But just as he moved deeper, his head flicked ahead. He suddenly felt some strange, and when he looked ahead, his eyes narrowed. He activated mana sense, again, trying to gauge for anything, but nothing? Silence. The world around him was silent. He gazed back down to see the silhouette growing further, and he proceeded to move down again. However, just as he moved down, his senses screamed as a massive shadow loomed, filling his entire field of vision. His eyes shook as he saw the massive shadow towering over everything his eyes could cover as a single pale light suddenly appeared. It was only when the pale light appeared that Lazarus felt the creature's presence, its silhouette stretching across his entire vision, appearing as large as the temple of the goddess of light. Lazarus held his breath and he looked at Anaz, who stared at the creature in horror, his entire body shaking. The shadow moved closer, revealing what had only been a vague outline before. Dark skin with several sharp bones protruding outward, its unfocused white eyes seemed to fade in and out, adding to its terrifying presence. The pale light flickered again, and for a split second he saw the creature's maw. The teeth were enormous, sharp, and thin. Each one was at least 5 times his size, gleaming like a trap waiting to snap shut. In seconds, the jaw was already upon him. Lazarus didn't think much. He reached out to grab Anaz and took a step forward, activating Step of Suppression. Swoosh! His figure dropped rapidly, bubbles forming as the pressure around him heightened. He could feel Anaz struggling as he was dragged down, but he couldn't care less about how he was currently feeling. Looking up, he saw the pale light flicker again, turning towards him. The creature? It was still following him. Lazarus's entire body grew tense, the darkness swallowing him from all directions as he sank deeper and deeper into the darkness. The deeper he sank, the greater the pressure became. He could feel his chest starting to ache. The sudden increase in pressure was taking a toll on his body, but he had no choice but to do this. Just a little more, a little. Thump. He felt something touch his feet. I've reached the bottom? Lazarus didn't think much as he activated Lament of Lies, blending himself and Anaz perfectly with the darkness around. At the same time, he kept his gaze focused on the massive creature up ahead, the light flickering away and darkness taking over. It was also in that moment that he lost complete sight of it. Even with mana sense, Lazarus held his breath as he crouched down, trying his best to hide in the rocks he was in. They felt rather smooth to the touch, but he didn't think much of it. He did his best to hide their presence as his body started to shudder under the cold. He didn't know how long had passed, but he could feel that he was slowly starting to run out of oxygen. He was about to reach the point where he'd have to go back up before it was too late. But could he really go back up? He looked at the darkness around him, his breath tense as the silence around him felt suffocating. It felt as though it was just the two of them present, but Lazarus could tell there was a third figure. It was lurking somewhere, looking for them. And sure enough, flick! A pale light appeared just a few meters away from them, causing Lazarus's entire body to shudder as he saw the body of the gigantic figure moving past him. Anaz froze entirely next to him, his breathing seemingly stopping as the two stood in absolute silence while watching the frame move along the water. Lazarus stood cautiously, trying his absolute best to minimize their presence. He was so focused that he almost jumped up when he felt a subtle tug coming from Anaz. Lazarus frowned, his head snapping towards Anaz in an attempt to tell him to stop. However, it was the moment that he turned around that he saw the shocked expression on his face. Lazarus tilted his head, and just as he was starting to wonder what was going on with him, he saw Anaz point down. Down? Lazarus followed Anaz's actions, and soon his expression changed. Because it was dark before, he couldn't see it properly, but with the faint light coming from the gigantic monster, he finally noticed his surroundings. The rocks, he took a closer look at them. They were smooth, round, and well-defined as they stretched up around him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted 5 such rocks. Lazarus looked closer, his eyes slowly opening. Fingers? Slowly, Lazarus lowered his head, his chest tightening. That was when he saw it. The massive frame of a statue that appeared to be twice the size of the strange monster, its colossal form half submerged in the seabed as they stood atop its open palm. Chapter 625, The Hidden Horror 3. The dim light reached only so far, illuminating a small patch around them. Beyond the outstretched fingers, curving inward like the bars of a cage, and the faint silhouette of the statue's form, all Lazarus could see was darkness. The darkness was suffocating, and so was the cold that surrounded them from all sides. Looking around, Lazarus could no longer spot the silhouette from before. It had faded before he knew it, and all that was left was the strange sea monster that lurked around them, its light casting a dim glow over the surroundings as it circled the area. This is rather problematic. Lazarus's gaze swept the surroundings. He was trying to gauge his situation. I'm slowly running out of oxygen. If I don't move up in the next few minutes, it'll be too late for me. But at the same time, I can't fight this monster. It wasn't as though the monster was incredibly strong. Judging from the fluctuations coming from its body, maybe it was nearly a destroyer rank, but still not there yet. This meant that it was still a terror rank. Lazarus was confident in dealing with such a creature, but that was on land. His skills were limited in the water. The time it took for him to chant a spell was longer, and the effectiveness of his spells was also lower. There was a reason why Inez said that the pirates had dominance over the seas even when fighting against higher-ranked opponents. The world within the water was an entirely different world. Within this world, he was a nobody. An insignificant creature. And then, flick! The darkness returned, swallowing him up completely. Lazarus felt his chest grow heavier as the darkness swallowed him, his gaze sharper than before as he lost all sense of the creature that lurked around him. He stood next to one of the fingers, his hand feeling the smooth yet rough exterior. Did it leave? He looked around cautiously. Even with mana sense, he couldn't detect a single thing. Time continued to tick, and he felt the oxygen within his lungs depleted with the passing of the seconds. A creeping dread started to settle within his mind. However, he continued to remain calm and rational. He couldn't panic. He couldn't allow himself to panic. This was a waiting game. It was a game that was used to determine who had the most patience. But it was also a disadvantageous game. He couldn't afford to wait for long, unlike the creature which could breathe underwater. Lazarus's mind started to spiral as time continued to pass. He was starting to feel the cold biting and latching onto his skin as he continued to bide for time, his mind churning with all sorts of ideas and thoughts. But soon, time was up. I have to move. He couldn't afford to stay within the water for longer. And so, nudging Inez next to him, he placed his hand over the tip of the finger and gently pushed himself up, his body floating into the darkness as he scanned his surroundings with extreme caution. Is it gone? Lazarus couldn't tell at all. He continued to drift up, his movements as slow as possible. He didn't want to attract any unwanted attention. He slowly and carefully started to move up the water, his chest tingling as he looked around him. Everything was proceeding smoothly, but he didn't lower his guard. The silence around him left him completely unsettled. Furthermore, he didn't know if the monster would show up or not. He circled his arms around the water once more, moving up. But just as he did, flick! A pale light appeared beneath him, forcing his entire body to stiffen as he immediately stopped. Inez, who had been following from behind, similarly stopped. They both looked down and saw the massive form of the creature gliding beneath them. That's when they also got a clearer view of the flickering light ahead of it, attached to its body by a long, rod-like extension. A growing sense of unease settled in their bodies as they spotted the light, and just as Inez started to grow nervous, Lazarus's gaze moved elsewhere. With the monster still beneath, lighting up the seabed, his eyes finally caught sight of another structure in the distance. He couldn't see much, the light barely reached beyond a few feet, but it was enough to feel the immense scale of the place. Seaweed clung to the walls, and intricate patterns and lines were etched into the stone, depicting something he couldn't quite make out. Lazarus looked at the strange structure for a few seconds, engraving it deeply in his mind before slowly turning around and shifting his attention up. He didn't know if he had enough oxygen within his lungs to be able to make it up. To make matters worse, he could feel the creature beneath them react to their every movement. The less they moved, the less it seemed to notice them. They had to go slowly. One smooth and slow motion at a time. That was exactly what they did as they tried to claw their way back towards the surface. The monster beneath didn't seem to notice them as they moved up, but at the same time it almost felt as though it was aware of them. Watching them. This feeling never seemed to leave, even as they managed to get halfway up. In fact, it appeared to grow the higher up they went. Bah! Thump! Bah! Thump! In the silence, Lazarus could feel and hear his own heartbeat. He unknowingly started to speed up his movements, trying his best to get to the surface even faster, but it was also in that moment that he felt something squirm beneath him. Oh! Lazarus's heart tightened as he spotted a black vortex beneath him, squirming as it headed rapidly in their direction, the faint dot of light within the vortex growing brighter as it approached them. His heart nearly leaped out of his throat when he saw just how fast it was moving, and it was also then that he realized that the monster was finally coming for them. Inez was the first one to move, the area around him squirming with bubbles as he shot up. His speed was fast, but nowhere near as fast as the rapidly approaching gigantic creature beneath. Looking at it and looking up, Lazarus knew that it was impossible for him as well. There was simply no way for them to outrun it. Inez, who saw this, started to panic even more, his mind racing as he looked at Lazarus, who remained still in the water. What are you doing? Go up. Shit. His pupils dilated when he saw the massive creature rapidly approach them. Fuck. I shouldn't have come here. Why did I even bother following him? Shit. May the goddess of light protect me. While panicked, Inez kept his eyes on the merchant who remained still in the water. This drove Inez crazy, especially when the monster was now a few meters beneath them, its maw open and its sharp teeth pointed. No. Anaz internally screamed as he saw the monster about to swallow up the merchant, but that only lasted for a brief moment. It was right as the monster was about to swallow Lazarus when Anaz saw the merchant take a single step forward, his entire body shooting down shortly after. Thump! A muffled bang echoed in the water shortly after as the merchant landed directly onto the creature's sharp tooth. Wah! Anaz was shocked to see the merchant's actions. But things were far from over. The moment the merchant settled himself on the monster's teeth, he flicked his hand, and over several dozen thin threads appeared, each one shooting from out of his arm and tightening around the monster's teeth. The entire process was extremely quick, and in a matter of seconds, the monster's teeth were covered in thin threads. By the time the creature had time to react, it was already too late as Lazarus clenched his hand, forcing its body to slowly start to shut. But things weren't over. The moment the monster noticed something amiss, its body jerked and flicked, seemingly trying to force Lazarus away, but as if one step ahead, Lazarus kicked himself up and pressed his hand against the monster's head. Anaz watched as several purple runes formed around Lazarus's palm, settling themselves deep into the monster's body. Curse magic! Anaz recognized the runes in an instant. From their purple color and complexity, it looked like some sort of advanced spell. The entire process lasted no more than half a second as Lazarus pulled his hand away, kicking his body away as the creature jerked and squirmed in the water, its pale light flickering in and out continuously. Lazarus stared at the creature for a few seconds before looking back up towards the water surface and moving up. Anaz could only float in the water, completely stunned by what he had just witnessed. While he was already aware that the man before him was no regular merchant, the scene before him had left him utterly speechless. However, he couldn't remain speechless for long, as this wasn't the right time for that. Without the threat of the monster, making it all the way up was not very hard. They both managed to reach shortly after as their heads popped out of the water. Splash! Ha! Ha! Anaz took heavy gulps of air the moment he popped out of the water, his body turning to what felt like jelly. Even though he didn't do anything particularly taxing, he felt incredibly tired by the experience. He wanted nothing more than to go back on land. And yet, thinking about what he had managed to witness beneath the water, he understood that it wasn't the time for him to rest. We should quickly report what we've found to the temple. With their help, we might be able to. Enough with the temple. Lazarus's calm voice cut him off before he could finish his sentence as his gaze appeared to be scanning the waters beneath and his brows were furrowed tightly. Anaz blinked his eyes. What was he looking at? Take a deep breath. The merchant said, pressing his hand over Anaz's shoulder. Before Anaz even had the time to scream, his entire body was sucked deeply into the water. The darkness swallowed him again. But not for long. As soon as he regained his bearings, he spotted a massive body lying on the seabed, its form twitching relentlessly within the pale, dim light that surrounded them. And as his eyes widened, that's... If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions. Just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp. Or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.